What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com and the Hook'em Horn Show. We're coming back at you all today with our 2024-25 Texas men's basketball season preview, where we take a look at Texas's roster rotation, the schedule, give our preview and predictions for the upcoming season, inaugural campaign in the SEC. We're also taking a look at, kind of what the SEC looks like this year, what that landscape could prove to be, with the Longhorns and Sooners leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, like I said, for the inaugural season. And at the national level, every year we give our national title picks and what we think that could look like. Some of the top teams around college hoops, give our thoughts there. But Shane, we're on the cusp. We're recording this Sunday evening. We're under 24 hours from the start of college hoop season. I've said this for the last few years with the portal cycle and high school recruiting really stretching for the signing period from November to May, November to April, something like that. I think it's November to May now. That the offseason just feels so short in college basketball. And this year, especially because Texas's portal class was very good, and you had high school recruiting going down to the finish line. The thing that feels different for me about this season is that there's more stability. There's more consistency with the expectations. This is Rodney Terry's second full year as the full-time head coach. He's, I think everyone, if I'm not mistaken, isn't everyone on the roster now his recruits?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, for the first time. So, we've really reached this period where, this is Terry's team. And, you can kind of see that with some of the pieces he's put in place on this roster, all the transfers, a lot of scoring, a lot of good distance shooters, a lot of good free throw shooters, and just a plethora of guard and wing depth on this team, and some exciting upside, I think, in the front court. This season starts tomorrow for Texas. They're underway in Las Vegas opener against Ohio State. So we got a big game right out of the gates. You did your 3 bold predictions for the game. I will have my preview and predictions for like the how to watch piece and score prediction up later tonight. And so definitely we'll be paying close attention to that. But yeah, Shane, I want to pass it over to you. What are your thoughts regarding Texas and the SEC coming into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beginning of every season is exciting. And I think in the new era of college basketball, especially the way that Coach Terry and his staff has approached it, where you're really turning over a lot of your roster year in and year out, it almost adds that much more excitement because we've never seen these group of guys play together. We'll get into the rotation and the roster management a little bit later in the video, but for all intents and purposes, you really only have 2 contributors returning in Kendall Weaver and Caden Shedrick. So it's going to be a whole new experience for the fan base and for us covering the team, which I think is exciting. And you used the word upside when you were talking. I think that's what this team provides for this fan base. There's a lot of upside, a lot of hope. You see him ranked at number 19 in the preseason AP poll, pretty consistently in that range in most of the analytical models, except Bart Torvik does have them at 11 in the country. And I think with the range of the true freshman talent, and specifically Trey Johnson, and the scoring elements that were brought in through the portal, I think this team has a chance to be, not only really good, but really fun to watch. There were some teams in the Shaka Smart years where even though they'd make the tournament and be a 6 or a 7 seed, they just weren't the most fun to watch. But I think this team has what it takes to put up a lot of points. I know Terry wants to play with more pace, get out and run. They're playing a little bit more positionless basketball. So I think night in and night out, it's going to be a good watch for the fan base. And, I think another reason the season sneaks up on us is because we have a good football team to watch and cover. And people forget that there is that overlap between them. And, hopefully if Texas football advances far into the college football playoff, there's, nearly a 3-month overlap between the 2 teams. But all in all, super excited for the season. And I'm pumped that Texas opens up against an Ohio State team. It's a good program. It's a talented team. It's not like a top 5 matchup, but you're not playing, no disrespect, you're not playing a Rice or a UTEP. You're playing another Power 4 team, or I guess I'm thinking football terms, a major conference team that has aspirations to make the NCAA tournament. So I'm excited to see what this team does and how they handle an early test.
Potentially for Texas, the early season schedule provides opportunities to see a lot of these new contributors on this roster and see what they can do. Texas, I was looking at a stat earlier today. I think Texas returned something like, and you mentioned it with, really the only three guys you bring back, the only two guys that had regular minutes last season were Weaver and Shedrick. And then you have Onyema, who was in the rotation at times, but deeper down the bench mostly last season, and probably will be the case again this year. That said, you got some good early tests. Ohio State right out of the gates. You return home for 3 games, all of which Texas will be favored heavily. I'd imagine 20 plus points in each of those games. Houston Christian, Chicago State, Mississippi Valley State. And then you get into late November, early December, and then you got 3 or 4 games there that are really, really going to test you again. And, we'll see if Texas can come out of this stretch with 1 or no losses, where you got Ohio State, Syracuse, and then either St. Joe's or Texas Tech to round out the Legends Classic. Is that one at MSG this year, or is that?
It's in Barclays. I'll be there.
Oh, okay.
Which I'm pumped about. Yeah.
Gotcha. Brooklyn. Yeah. So in Brooklyn. Then you got NC State for the SEC ACC Challenge on December 4th. That's your first really true road test. I mean, Syracuse in Brooklyn is kind of a road game just by virtue of the size of their fan base and it not being too far of a drive for them. And then, I mean, St. Joe's and Texas Tech, I think, are both potential tournament contenders this year. Definitely Texas Tech. But yeah, looking at the schedule, the non-con gives you some good tests early, not really much after. I don't really see that many challenging games after UConn, which is the big one. That's kind of, you got that week in early December. December 4th, you got NC State. I don't know why I had such a weird build up to that, but you got NC State on the road in Raleigh on December 4th, and then you got UConn at home. I believe that's the front end of the back-to-backs of the home and home series. This year it's played in Austin. Next year you head up to, I believe, UConn Stores, Connecticut, correct? You got 3-4 weeks here of really tough tests, stretch that up to 5 weeks, including the Ohio State game. I'm interested to see how this team gels right away, because while there's a lot of talent and depth at key positions, I think, you got a lot of mouths to feed. I mentioned this off air. You got multiple guys that, come into this team scoring in double figures last season on other major conference teams, or, Indiana State, that was a really good team out of the Missouri Valley Conference last year. You bring in Julian Larry, Jason Kent, 2 guys that, I mean, might not even be in the starting 5 to start the regular season. And so there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed. But I think there's going to be a lot of points scored for the Longhorns this season. I know you mentioned in your bold predictions that Texas can cross that 80-point threshold tomorrow against Ohio State. I think you're going to see them do that a lot this season. You got some teams on the schedule this year, St. Joe's, Texas Tech, that are probably going to play at a little bit faster pace, a little bit faster tempo, and you have the opportunity to have some games that get up into the 80s, maybe low 80s, high 70s. And so, you're going to get, I think you're going to get some of these guys, some confidence builders right away, get them meshed in with the rotation, get them ready to go. That said, I kind of want to focus on where you think the strengths of this team lie really quickly, more like a high level, and then we can kind of dig into the rotation a little bit more. And then maybe what some of the question marks are for you heading into the non-con.
Yeah, so I think the strengths, I mean, depth is clearly a strength, but in regard to the skill sets of these players, I think the strength is going to be getting out and running. I think a strength is that you will always have 3, most of the time 4 guys on the court who can bring the ball up and handle the basketball. I think it's going to be very free flowing. I think you have some really good athletes on this team that hopefully will be used in the open court. And sneakily, I think this can be a pretty good 3-point shooting team as well, especially with some of the transfers you brought in. I know last year we spent all season, talking about Kendall Weaver as a freshman. He shot over 40%. And then, in his first year in Austin, I think he struggled to cross the 30% threshold, but if he can bump that up even a little bit, I think, adding him to the mix with the Julian Larry, who shot 45% from deep last year, Jordan Pope, who's at 36, 37%, Tremont Mark, and Trey Johnson will be a little streaky, but can also knock him down, Arthur Kaluma. So I think you have a team that can score in a variety of ways, a lot of guys who can space the floor. And I really think that term positionless basketball, which is used a lot these days, is just the best way to describe this team, because especially with the amount of depth that they have, there's going to be a lot of different five-man rotations that Coach Terry can turn to. And I think, on another point, that's going to test this coaching staff to figure out who their best five are in what situations against what teams, because you do have, so many assets at your disposal. But that's definitely not a bad problem to have. You touched on it in my bold prediction. I said they're going to score over 80 against Ohio State. I think that'll be the case a lot this year, like you were saying, just because I think scoring is a main strength for this team. I added it up, obviously. Transfer scoring isn't linear because there's only one basketball. But of the 6 transfers that were brought in, we can call it 5, leave off Malik Presley. The 5 main transfers that were brought in, they combined to average over 72 points per game last season. So that just shows that, every single one of the transfers you brought in is a pretty solid score in their own right. It's going to be, how do you get all of them touches, all of them shots? But like I said, not a bad problem to have at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm excited to see some of the year 2 jumps for some of the guys that were in the program last year, that maybe stepped up, contributed more down the stretch, or just were more developmental guys last year. I'm mainly looking at Kendall Weaver and Devin Pryor as 2 guys that, I think Kendall Weaver could kind of be your like 6th or 7th man this year, just with the defensive chops he brings. He's almost Tell me how you think of this one. He's almost like I think he's more athletic actually, but just defensively and the energy he brings and how good he can be in transition. Alex Caruso. He's almost like our Alex Caruso coming off the bench. And he really helps you with that positionless basketball where, depending on the size, he can defend anyone between the 1 and the 3. And he's really quick in help defense too. And so, I agree. A lot of the strengths you brought up, I think the wing scoring, obviously backcourt and wing depth, as I said earlier in the video, all those guys you brought in, really create a situation where, there's, I guess I don't need to repeat everything you say, but you're right. There's some really intriguing, probably 8 or 10 different ways you could spin, them playing a 3-man combination for the backcourt and the wing. Looking at the rotations last season, you only had, I remember counting, you only had 6 3-man combinations in the backcourt that were even net positive for plus or minus per 100 possessions. So you were very limited because you were so reliant on Max Asmus playing maybe smaller lineups, even sometimes just some weird lineups, playing Brock Cunningham at the 3. This year you just have a lot more mobility. You have a lot more options as to how you can initiate the offense. One of the things and we can talk about this when we get into the rotations, but one of the things that kind of catches my eye is how Texas can move the basketball around and like I said, initiate the offense. You got guys like Trey Johnson, Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope even, but especially like Julian Larry. You got a lot of guys that are good on and off ball players. For Tremont Mark, for example, guy that shot on uncontested 3s last season, shot above 35% on catch and shoot and pull up jumpers from beyond the arc. Trey Johnson, I think, can get to that range. Jordan Pope on contested jumpers. I found this one interesting on contested 3-point shots, catch and shoot, and pull up. Shot over 33% from beyond the arc. These types of numbers in a multitude of different situations are going to make it really difficult to defend Texas from the wing and from the perimeter this season. Given, I think Texas probably has one of the 3 to 5 best backcourt and wing rotations in the SEC. Backcourt might be a little bit more subjective, but wing definitely might be the best. So, I'm going to try to keep my hype train from running too far away because I know we haven't discussed college hoops too much in the past few months on here, and so there's a lot of thoughts that I have to get out. But yeah, I think the different ways that you can interchange some of these rotations in the backcourt is going to be really interesting, as you mentioned. A big challenge for Terry to figure out how those pieces fit together with so many early season challenges against 4 to 5 potential quad one opponents. Um, the other thing that I really think is going to be a strength of this team is going to be off ball movement. I kind of alluded to it before with talking about just all the different pieces you have on the wing from some of the new front court additions too. I'm mainly looking at Arthur Kaluma and Jason Kent as two guys that really move well off the ball, especially Kent. These guys are really smart, cutting, finding lanes off ball. And you got what? Julian Larry, Jordan Pope at a minimum, two guys that are really, really good at finding off ball movement. Arthur Kaluma is really good at working that from inside the arc too, and so is Kent. Texas is going to be a really tough team to defend if they're cut into the basket this year. I think that this team, you're going to see a little bit of a stylistic shift where last year they were more reliant on those high ball screens, pick and rolls between guys like Asmus and Shedrick, Dessou, Dylan Mitchell, roll into the basket, get some lobs up. I think this year, yeah, it's just going to be more free flowing. I'm not saying it's going to be ISO ball as much. That's not really what you want to see because you got just too many weapons to narrow it down just to one or two initiators and scorers. But, you know, I think that this year the ball movement should be really, really good. I think that while Texas, the ball movement was pretty good last year, they ranked in the top half of the Big 12 in assists per game and assist percentage. But this year I would expect Texas to be in the top 5 in the SEC in that mark. The only thing I would have a question on a little bit is who is that true floor general this year? Like who steps up in that alpha role? Last year was Max Asmus in a sense. No, it wasn't even him really. Was it Tyrese Hunter led us in assists last year, I thought.
I think Asmus and Hunter, yeah, they're both at 4.1 last year.
Both had 4.1. So actually, I guess in that regard, you might not see numbers wise, you probably won't see that much of a style, like you won't see that much of a deviation, but stylistically, I think someone's going to emerge this year, whether that's
I think it'll
Larry.
be Pope. I think it'll be Jordan Pope.
I think so too. He's done well with very little support at Oregon State, and he's adapted really well to different situations there in his 2 years. And I think that from what I've heard in preseason camp, he's been one of those guys that's kind of stepped up and adapted the quickest. So,
and I think it's a good problem to have that we're discussing this because, in guards win in March. And I think if you look up and Jordan Pope has established himself as that true, lead point guard on this team, and you have Julian Larry as like your 6th or 7th man, that is just you can't even put a number on how important that is because, even if Pope's playing 28, 30 minutes a game, anytime he's not on the floor, Larry would then be on the floor. And if you have a point guard who can take care of the ball, especially with all the talent you have on the wings, like you're mentioning, the off-ball movement, like that is going to be crucial. And that's like a sneaky factor that can win you some big time games when you just aren't turning the basketball over and you always have an extension of the coach out on the floor.
While yes, there's a lot of new pieces on this team, there's still a lot of experience from, as I mentioned, from major conference teams, from all the transfers that you brought in. There's a lot more proven transfers that Texas has this upcoming season than they had, I think, each of the past, 2 years ago, you had some guys coming back, Marcus Carr, Timmy Allen, Christian Bishop, those types that could really help you out. But this year you got more versatility. Now I will say there are some concerns that I have for this team. Namely, the front court depth. I'm in size, rim protection is what I'm getting at. Caden Shedrick is a very good player when he's healthy, but he's always had some injury issues throughout his career, and we don't really have an established 5 behind him. Last year, you had Dessou and Shedrick to where, Dessou had some injury issues out of the gate, recovering from that foot surgery. Shedrick was kind of dealing with the back issues all year, but they could kind of be interchanged. This year, you don't have Dessou. That is, Asmus was a big loss, but I think Dessou was by far the biggest loss on this team. And unless Texas is planning on running a lot of small ball with like, Kent or Kaluma, even someone like a Nick Cody playing at the 5, I don't really know what that answer is. I mean, I don't really have faith in Onyema yet to be taking on heavy minutes at the 5. He kind of struggled last season rebounding, establishing position in the paint. And he's what, 6'8", 6'9". He still doesn't have quite the size that you need to contest down low. Whereas a guy like Nick Cody, about 6'9", 6'10", with a good wingspan. What are your thoughts on the front court depth situation right now? Because I know we're going to talk about that with the rotation, but I think it's worth noting that with you facing some teams that are solid in the front court out of the gates this season, a Texas Tech, UConn, those types, you know,
that's where you're going to get beat is in the front court. And I noted that in my 3 bold predictions against Ohio State. Ohio State, they have some talent in the front court, but they're all underclassmen. They're bringing in Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky, who was former 5-star recruit in the class of 23, but didn't pan out. So especially earlier in the season when Shedrick's healthy, I don't think it's as much of an issue because unless he gets in foul trouble, you can play him 25 minutes a game, and those other 15 minutes you can piecemeal together with an Onyema. Or running small ball with Kaluma or Kent at the 5. But, in general, we talked about it when in some videos towards the end of the portal cycle. Like, this Texas portal class is solid, but what they really need is another big man, another center. Unfortunately, that never came to fruition. They ended up getting Arthur Kaluma, who a terrific get. Kaluma could lead the team in scoring this year potentially, but now you're looking at it and you're saying there's some holes in the front court. To Shedrick's credit, well, it did seem like he was banged up for, all 5 months of the season last year. He did play in 32 of 34 games. He was on a minutes restriction a fair amount, but he was out there at least a little bit in most games last season. So while it does seem like he's banged up a lot, I don't know if it's something to be super concerned about. Like, I don't know if it's one of those things where we can say that he's injury prone. I think he just happened to have a back and a shoulder, but no, I think it's clearly an issue. And right now, even with that fully healthy Shedrick, I'm still interested to see how those minutes are put together when he is off the floor. Yeah, I think if this team gets beat, it's going to be because of their front court play. That said, I noted this in my bold prediction that rebounding could be an issue. Coach Terry did come out and say last Wednesday that they rebounded well in the 2 closed-door scrimmages. I think this is going to be one of those things you really have to team rebound. They have a lot of length, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of leaking out. I think you're really going to have to find a body and rebound as a group because you're not just going to go up and beat people on the boards because you have a bunch of 6'10" guys, because that's certainly not the case.
I do wonder if someone like a Jamie Finson steps into like a backup role a few weeks into the season. I think that he'll have the opportunity. It sounds like he's competing right now with Onyema and I'm losing the other, and Nick Cody for backup minutes in the front court. They're going to be relying on some young guys to provide depth there, and so like I said, it'll be interesting to see who can kind of step up and fill those quality minutes that Texas really needs from the front court behind Shedrick. My only other concern for this team is going to be, I think, I don't like using the term wasted possessions, but while this team is trying to figure out its identity with all these new pieces, again, who is that initiator of the offense? I think Jordan Pope and Trey Johnson is the easy answer there, those 2 guys. But Tremont Mark is a guy that does like to get up a lot of shots. I don't remember if we had talked about it the other day off camera or not when we were recording a preview show, but talking about the potential usage rates for this team. Like you had a top-heavy team last year. Figuring out how those shots go around will be interesting early in the season. I think that you could see Texas push the tempo a lot to utilize really that wing, not only the wing depth, but the perimeter and wing length on the defensive end. You got, again, guys like Kendall Weaver. I think Trey Johnson can be pretty disruptive defending at the 2 at 6'6" with good length and athleticism. Hopefully he does become a high upside defender. Obviously offensively is where his game really stands out, but he's got the potential to be a pretty solid two-way guard. And then, Larry was a pretty dang good defender the last few years, and Pope, I think, a little underrated. The thing that I like about the guys that they got, I don't see, that was one of my qualms with Tyrese Hunter and Max Abmas, that backcourt, that was not a great defensive pairing. Hunter stepped it up at times last season, to his credit. I thought he played well in the Big 12 on the defensive end, but Abmas, he's just undersized, mainly contributed on the offensive end. You have some guys that can be some really net positive defenders this year, and I think Texas will improve their backcourt and perimeter, or their perimeter and wing defense this year. Front court, I think, is where I have more of the question marks, and rebounding. Getting beat on the glass last year was a huge issue for Texas in the Big 12, ranked bottom 5 in the Big 12 in rebounding percentage as a team. I think Shedrick give you some, Shedrick can get you a good number of rebounds, and so can Vincent if you get him in with good minutes. Cody is a monster on the glass in high school and in AAU ball. Kaluma and Kent, I think, are where the X factor is here on the offensive glass. Those are the guys you're going to be needing to get you some of those extra rebounds. One of the guys that we lost during the offseason that took a big hit to how Texas can do on the offensive glass is Dylan Mitchell. He was your most athletic, bounciest, kind of offensive boards guy for the last couple of years, and he's gone now. So how do you replace that athleticism and that production for what he normally didn't play all that heavy of minutes, but for those 15 or 20 minutes, he was pretty much always a net positive on the glass. I think that rebounding, front court depth would probably be my two biggest concerns if I had to narrow those down.
I agree.
Talking about the rotation, I think we've come to a consensus at this point of what that will probably look like. I'll pull it up here. You did a good piece on the site. What was it, about a week or two ago, talking about the projected rotation?
Yeah.
Let me share my screen here to show what I'm looking at. But you got for the backcourt Jordan Pope and Tremont Mark starting at the 1 and the 2. I think I would mostly agree with that. Probably Weaver and Larry, your first two off the bench. Malik Presley, good one to throw in there, kind of a bouncier guy. Again, another guy that, really could be a really gritty defender. I think I'm losing the name. Who we lost one guy, Anamikwe.
Yeah.
That was a pretty solid on-ball defender. Playing at the 2 or the 3, just didn't really contribute much offensively and didn't really mesh with Terry's system. Was more of a Chris Beard sort of system guy he was recruited by. But Hope and Mark, I think they can be good defensively together, but mainly offensively, it's going to be hard to match up against those two guys. And Weaver, Larry, both off the bench still. I have a hard time seeing a lot of teams matching up well with that two-man combination when you turn to the reserves.
100%. And I think if you had to start Larry and Weaver, that's not the worst thing in the world either. So for them to be your backup point guard, backup shooting guard, and again, a lot of this is pretty, I'm going to use the term again, for lack of a better term, positionless. But for those to be your two lead backup guards is a great thing. And yeah, I'm super high on Jordan Pope. I mean, you talked about him for the way he was able to. Oregon State, wasn't very good last year, but just watching him and the way he was able to kind of lead that team. It didn't end up in a lot of wins, but they're pretty solid on the offensive end. And Pope himself can score from anywhere on the court and is also, kind of a pass-first point guard. So he's kind of got the best of both worlds. I'm really excited about this backcourt. I think, one of the better backcourts you've had in a while, potentially. I think Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter proved to be pretty solid together. But I think from a scoring perspective, these two could be even better.
Yeah, it really, from an offensive perspective, I think that this could be the best scoring backcourt we've had on the 40 acres in the past decade. Just on the offensive end.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think the mixing and matching, because like you mentioned, like Weaver and Larry do bring an added element on the defensive end. So the mixing and matching you can do with these four is going to be really interesting. I'm excited to see what Coach Terry kind of has in store.
Yeah. on the wing. So I guess I'll kind of hyphen this with wing forwards. You got Trey Johnson, Arthur Kaluma mentioned here, where obviously Trey Johnson playing at the three. Whether you look at that as a true wing or a three-guard lineup, either way, Texas got good length, good scoring options. And Kaluma at the four, a guy that can give you floor spacing, rebounding, can score inside. Not much of a mid-range pull-up guy. That's probably the one area where you're not going to be relying on him to score the basketball. But overall, Paluma really opens up a lot of what Texas can do depth wise. Rotationally, he fits in nicely. Also, someone that has good length on the defensive end of the floor adds another piece to this lineup where you have a bunch of above average defenders that you can do a lot of switching and a lot of different matchups with. And at a bare minimum, that gets you to be an above average defensive team in the SEC. And that is an improvement for Texas.
Yeah, 100%. I think the great thing about these two guys is like Trey Johnson. I have no problem with Texas using him as like a two guard in Kaluma. I think you're going to see some times this year where he might be a small ball center for a couple minutes here and there. So these guys pretty versatile in their own right. And I think there's a chance that these two can be your two leading scorers this year.
Now let me ask you this. I accidentally skipped ahead, but on the page over there, but I see on here that you've got Devin Pryor listed it. I think, Devin Pryor at the three is fair. That's positionally where he probably fits best in a bigger lineup with more length. Assuming his development stays on track this year, that he sees more minutes, which was the plan for him when they brought him in late in cycle for the 2023 class. In the front court, you have Jason Kent listed. Yeah. Do you see a difference in roles between what they're going to do with Kaluma and Kent?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think Kaluma has more of a capability to handle the ball. I think Kent, you noted Kent is terrific. Both of them are solid off-ball players, but Kent really is terrific off the ball. He's not really going to hit you with any back-to-the-basket scoring, neither is Kaluma. But I see Kent as more of a traditional power forward who can also space the floor a little bit. Kaluma the same way, obviously can space the floor, but I think in regard to like grabbing and going, you trust Arthur Kaluma can do that. With Jason Kent, I don't know how often you want to see him dribbling the ball up the court.
We've mentioned this in a video before, I think when we were talking about the portal during the offseason, but Kent had a very specific role at Indiana State last season that made him really excel, where they would really keep him working kind of those inside lanes, have him moving around a lot off ball, and have him finish the ball, have him finish quickly. Like, he's a guy that when you're looking at the stats from last season, 95% of his field goals against quad 2, quad 3, and quad 1 opponents were assisted. Basically, I'm finding a roundabout, really nerdy way to say what you were saying. That yes, the reason I mention all this is because, Terry's an analytical guy. I'd imagine that he's not bringing in Kent that early in the offseason as Texas did with this past portal cycle during the spring window, without having an idea of what they're going to do very specifically with his role off the bench.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think, just looking at it, Kaluma's assist percentage was nearly 3 times higher than Kent's last year. I think Kaluma's just more capable with the ball in his hands, and you'll see that. So that's why I kind of slot Kent in as more of a true front court player, whereas Kaluma can kind of be considered a wing in my mind.
So with the front court here, Caden Chedrick, I think, is your pretty obvious starter at the 5 heading into the season. I see Nick Cody's name potentially sliding into that starting role next season, but he's not quite there yet. Someone that, high 4-star recruit. Was he the number 2 recruit in Texas? Number 1 power forward recruit in Texas in the 2024 class. Talented guy, got a lot of upside in respect to extending the floor. I think his jump shot's getting a lot better, but also his rebounding, defensive positioning have been getting better too. My question is, do you see I was talking about it earlier. Do you see more of these front court minutes out of the gates this season going to more small ball style play, or devoted to that scheme, or do you see it going more to getting these young guys minutes in spots early where you feel like you maybe can get an advantage in length on the rest of the floor to give them a little bit of, I don't know. There's a number of different ways to look at it with the depth.
It's a good question. I think you do have to prioritize developing the young guys a little bit. Like not to get into a macro conversation here, but Coach Terry has turned over pretty heavily the two rosters that he's had. And I think with a guy like Cody and a guy like Vincent, I think you do want to develop them a little bit and make sure they're multi-year players in your program. And kind of a way of doing that is making sure they get early minutes. So I think you could see, especially in the non-con games that are in hand, you get those freshmen some minutes here and there. I think in the games that matter more, Onyema is still a guy that's going to be used. When Shedrick was on those minute restrictions and Dessou was out, he did play some big minutes in some big games. How effective those minutes were, up to the viewer's interpretation. I think there's kind of clearly a ceiling on what Onyema can be, but he kind of has a high floor as well. You're gonna get activity on the defensive end. He can catch lobs. He can rebound well. So I think it's a long way to answer your question. It should be a mix of both. Obviously, I think we're both pretty high on Cody, and but the thing is with Nick Cody is he's not a true center either. So it's not like you have a 7-footer freshman behind Shedrick. I guess Vincent could be considered that guy, but Cody's more projects to be like a 4 who can space the floor. But I'd like to see the young guys play a good amount early in the season. But when it really comes down to it in the key moments, I think it's the front court. You're either going to shrink a little bit when you bring on Onyema, or you're going to shrink a little bit by moving Kent to the 5, or even potentially Kaluma to the 5.
Yeah, I could see that with the length you have at other positions that, you could kind of play more of a Rockets style of basketball, like they play now.
It's like make the other team match up against you.
Yeah.
There will be exactly. There will be some teams with big men who are just good enough on the offensive end where you can't get away with that, and I think that's where Vincent's length may come into play, his height at 6'11", but also I think that's going to be on the coaching staff to look on the defensive end of the floor, where this is a really capable big man, and without Shedrick, we can't match up against him. We're going to have to send the doubles effectively, and we're going to have to figure out how to work that. But in today's, especially this year in college basketball, it's more guard dominated, so I don't even think there are that many big men on the schedule who you're going to be super worried about catching it on the low block and, going for 20 or 25.
I want to look at kind of the SEC here, and we can give our predictions. So the SEC is an interesting one this year because going into the SEC, traditionally you would expect that a top 20 team like Texas would be in a spot to be, one of those like top tier contending teams. The SEC, I think the SEC this year is very top heavy, but there's like 10 teams I think that are all capable of making like a Sweet 16 run. And there's like half of those are very capable of making it to the Final Four this season. So there's a lot of depth in the conference, I will say. Maybe not as much as you would have gotten in the Big 12 on an average year. Do you think that the SEC is the best conference in college basketball this year? I think that still probably goes to the Big 12.
So they had the most teams in the top 25 with 9. I think the Big 12 has 8, which is crazy. 17 out of 25. Yeah, I do think you mentioned the SEC as top heavy, which I agree with, but I kind of like the top of the Big 12 better, if that makes sense. With Houston and Baylor and Arizona and Kansas.
Man, it's going to be interesting to watch that this year because, I'm looking at the KenPom net ratings for 2025, and There's only a .2 rating difference between the SEC and the Big 12, so it's very, very close. And obviously, with the Big 12, you've got I say top heavy for the SEC, but the Big 12, you've also got you got 6 teams in the top 15 for Ken Palm, and then for the SEC, you've got 3 teams in the top 15, but you've also got you've got all but 4 teams in the conference in the top 50. So I think it depends on how you measure that. I think people might be a little too high on teams like LSU and South Carolina this year. I've got questions about their proven depth and skill, but there's also teams in the conference that can make some noise, like a Georgia. I think Ole Miss at 46. Chris Beard opinions aside, I think that Ole Miss is probably going to be better than 46th in the Ken Palm rankings by the end of the season. So, it's interesting though, and especially to see Kentucky at 43rd or at 43 is weird. So, but obviously you got John Calipari going, so it's very different SEC landscape this year. Auburn, Alabama at the top. I mean, A&M's probably going to be pretty good. Tennessee should be good again under Rick Barnes. Texas in the preseason was picked to finish 7th. They're behind A&M in 5th, Florida in 6th. I think they're a little bit better than Florida. A&M and Texas is going to be interesting. I think both have very solid teams. A&M a little bit more proven, more cohesive. They have more returning minutes, a lot more than Texas does this season. But I mean, you look elsewhere around the SEC, I think Texas's scoring will give them an edge over most of the teams that they face in conference play. That either just don't have as many options or don't have the length that Texas brings. That said, it was surprising to me that the only Texas selection for all SEC preseason honors was 3rd team Tremont Mark. I gotta wonder if that's a little bit of SEC return bias, or if it's just like I look at a guy like maybe Jackson Robinson in Kentucky. I gotta think that Trey Johnson's probably more worthy of that slot for all preseason honors. But it's preseason honors. How much does that really matter when it's all said and done? I can see Texas realistically finishing 5th or 6th. I think 7th might be a tad low, but not too far off.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a wide range of outcomes for this Texas team because of the lack of continuity. I think you can build a solid, viable roster through the transfer portal, but I also think when you look at it, a lot of teams that are towards the top have, their best players are returners. A lot of the times their returners are transfers. Like you look at Alabama, Mark Sears and Grant Nelson, 2 transfers. But I am interested. I know I did see, I forget who, but someone on CBS Sports said that Texas would be one of the teams ranked in the preseason top 25 that does not make the tournament, and that would be a colossal failure. And I'm certainly not projecting that to happen. But just because of all the mouths to feed and, all the new faces being brought in, I think there could be a chance where this team doesn't achieve the expectations that we maybe put out for them, especially earlier in the season, in the non-con. Like if you go up and you invite UConn down to Austin and they beat the brakes off of you, that would, not be great. But I agree with you in regard to the SEC return bias. I think there's a chance, Trey Johnson, if it all goes well, could end up as a first teamer. I don't think that will happen because I don't think he'll have the box score numbers just based on how many scores this Texas team has. But, there's a chance that could happen. But, as a whole, I agree with you. I think 7 might be a little low. I think Texas is better than Florida this year. I also think Tennessee is a little too high. I think the Tennessee team last year was pretty flawed, but they had one of the best players in the country in Dalton Connect, who was able to save them night in and night out. So I think Tennessee at 3 is more of a shout to Rick Barnes and what he's done year in and year out in the conference, but I don't see them finishing as a top 3 team in the SEC. I will say that one of the things that was so great about the Big 12 is every single night, there's a chance for a quad one, or at least a quad two win. That's going to be the case in the SEC this year. So I'm excited to watch. Just because we're switching conferences doesn't mean the play is going to dip. And like you said, according to Ken Palm, the SEC is actually rated a little higher this year. But one team that I'm looking out for, Mississippi State. Really love Josh Hubbard, sophomore guard, averaged nearly 19 a game last year. I think that could be a pretty fun team because Christian's teams typically are, top 20, 25 on the defensive end. And now they have, the offensive firepower to match with that. Mississippi State could be a sleeper this year.
Yeah, both the Mississippi schools could be really good. I would agree with that for sure. I would say this about the SEC schedule this year. It works out in Texas's favor that you get arguably the three best SEC teams, at least in the preseason poll. You get all three of those at home. Alabama, Auburn, and Tennessee all have to come to the Moody Center, I do believe. And so that's a benefit. You still, I think, you still got it home and home with Arkansas, which can be tough. Arkansas, I think, is going to be a solid team this season. Some of the road games you got, though, I think they have to play, like Ole Miss on the road. Again, I think Ole Miss is going to be good, but, you got a stretch here of, end of January, early February. You got a stretch of winnable games where you've got, Ole Miss on the road, LSU on the road, Arkansas at home, and then Vanderbilt on the road. I think that even though you played 3 out of 4 before that Alabama game on February 11th at home, even though 3 of those 4 games are on the road, those arguably could be 3 of the 4 bottom half teams that fill out the SEC standings this year. I think that I think when you look at it, Texas could have a similar record to what they did last season, which if that's the case, I don't know. So do you buy Texas being a low floor team?
I do, just because I think having a lot of guys who are
I should put more oomph behind that.
I think having a lot of guys who are good scorers, I think there's a chance where it can turn south. I think I would be surprised if there's not at least one guy who ends the season pretty disgruntled, and if it's a guy with more eligibility that's out the door. So and honestly, I'm not totally sold on Coach Terry yet. I know we've had this conversation before, but I don't think he is not even close to one of the best coaches in the country. Is he a top 25 coach? I don't think so. So I think just having all of this talent together, it doesn't really mean a whole lot unless you can play together as a team. And, my doubt in Coach Terry, coupled with that, I think is why I think this team does have a low floor.
I think for Terry, his strengths we've learned are really off-season adjustments and analytics, off-season development. The weaknesses mostly come in season, and with another tough SEC slate, we saw in the Big 12 last year with a good number of disappointing losses each of the last 2 years. Really, he's going to win some games at home. Texas always wins some games at home that are going to look really impressive, and then you're going to have some underwhelming performances in the SEC on the road. So I guess that is where you get a little concerned against some of those middle tier teams where it's okay, some real resume beaters. Let's say you get a loss to LSU on the road. That's kind of hard to come back from if you're not winning those other big games that you need to. Like you said, if you look at the end of the season, Texas is 7 wins in the SEC. That's fair. I don't know if, you don't collect those easy wins. The easier, I'm not going to say easy because it's not really a night off deal. In the SEC this year, there's no easy games. Maybe besides Vanderbilt on the road, but even then, Vanderbilt still could be a top 100, top 125 team, still a quad 2 team. On the road, quad 2 still is not a guaranteed win by any means. I'm looking at Ken Palm right now. Ken Palm projects Texas, as I said, to finish very similar record-wise to last season. 20-10 overall, 10-8 in SEC play. That doesn't include that second game in Brooklyn here in a few weeks. So looking at the games in Brooklyn, I don't know why, but Texas always splits those. Um, Granted, last year you play who did take was it Cincinnati or Louisville?
They beat Louisville. Smith hit a game winner.
Yeah, and that was a really bad Louisville team. Um,
Yeah.
and then they did okay against UConn, but not great. It always surprised me how well Texas has played against UConn the past few years.
Yeah, they
Um,
played UConn better than I'd have to go back and look at UConn's schedule, but up in Seton Hall got UConn in early December. But when you look back at UConn's schedule, like Texas played them closer. Like that was probably a top 5 hard game that UConn had. Texas cut it to within 4 or 5 with 5 minutes left, and that was without Dylan DeSue. So I think we didn't realize how much of a juggernaut that UConn team was going to be last year. But looking back on it, like that was a really solid performance.
and I think Terry's really good at getting his team prepared for those, especially early in the season. Like I said, he's good at that off-season analysis and adjustments. It's those games. NCAA tournament's a similar deal. He's got extra time to prepare and get ready. We played well in the NCAA tournament last year. That was a good Tennessee team that Texas lost to by 2 possessions. And I have faith that if Texas could make the tournament again this year, that like you said, they have enough options. It's about that conference, like that, the heat of conference play. Is Texas going to didn't they lose to West Virginia on the road last year?
Yeah, and UCF at home, which
Yeah.
was that was a
Yeah,
low point.
You have to avoid those letdowns.
Yeah.
Like those are the sort of games where, teams that still got talent, even though they might not be the best in the conference, you still have to play, you still have to get up for those. Chris Beard was really good at that. Rodney Terry, I think you've been alluding to that for the past 10 minutes. But yeah, Rodney Terry has not shown he can do that yet. I do have Texas at the I think they go 20-11 during the regular season. You know what? No. I'm going to go 19-12. And then I think that they go 9-9 in SEC play. I think that's good enough to get them in the tournament, but you're probably looking like 8 or 9 seed.
Okay. I think I'm right there with you. I think you go 9-9 in SEC play. And then so you got 13 non-con. I think you'll lose to UConn at home. And I think you'll lose one more. So I got them at 11-2 in non-con and 9-9. So I'm sitting at 20-11.
Okay. So pretty much what Ken Palm has.
Yep. One more or one less conference win and one more non-con is what I'm working with.
Okay. Let me ask you this, since this is the one game that's not included on Ken Palm and it could be an important one. Would you rather, as a Texas fan, and you can take any number of approaches to this, you as a Texas fan, would you rather play St. Joe's or Texas Tech in that second game in Brooklyn? Because obviously St. Joe's is going to it'd probably be the easier win.
Yeah. It's a good question. I haven't thought about it because I think there's like St. Joe's is a pretty good team. They're 86 in Ken Palm right now, but they're nowhere near the level of a Tech. I completely throw out the who Tech is and if Texas has a basketball rivalry with them. I more think about it in the perspective of what does it do for your resume? Would it be better to kind of get not a shoe in, but like probably a win, a Q2 win over St. Joe's, or risk a Q1 loss? That's a good question. I think I'd probably rather play Tech just because, while we do have some big games in the non-con, there are a lot of cupcakes, a lot of Q3, Q4s. So getting another Q1 on the schedule would be nice.
It's going to be interesting too because we got Ohio State out of the gates, and then Syracuse, who's a middle tier ACC team, maybe middle to lower tier post Jim Boeheim era. Syracuse, I think, will probably be a win for Texas. Probably. We'll see how things go against Ohio State. Texas plays Syracuse and Ohio State. Texas Tech, their only potential quad 1 or quad 2 game before that final game in Brooklyn is against St. Joe's. Otherwise, they're playing nothing but quad 4 opponents. So Texas Tech has over a 99.5% chance to win each of their first 4 games. So I think that would be an interesting test out of the gates for Texas for sure. And you say that, yeah, Texas, especially when you look at that like mid to late December period, sometimes you might get like one game in there that's mildly interesting. For Texas, that's just not really the case this season. New Mexico State might do something in the Mountain West this year. We'll see. But outside of that, it's a bunch of teams in Quad 4 before you play A&M on January 4th. So, like I said, it's that November 4th to December 8th. That stretch, you're facing 5 Quad 1, Quad 2 teams. About half your games roughly are in that, actually over half. And then after that, it's a little boring. And then it ramps back up right away in SEC play because you got A&M on the road, Auburn at home, Tennessee at home, and then OU rivalry game on the road from January 4th until I believe the 15th. So it's going to be an interesting season. I don't know. I don't know how some of these stretches are going to go. I like you said, it really is probably among the Texas teams that I've covered. Because Shaka Smart teams for the most part had a low floor, but just the ceiling was so low, or had a high floor, but the ceiling was so low. Most years, at least, especially in the postseason, outside of that COVID year. Okay. Where do you think with 20 and 11, though, that gets Texas seed-wise for the NCAA tournament? I don't know if you had said that.
No, I think 20 and 11, you're probably looking at like a 6.
Yeah, okay. I going with this year a pretty bland pick for the SEC championship, like the SEC regular season title. I'm going to Auburn. It's a safe pick. I get that. But they've been so consistent under Bruce Pearl, and Janai Broom's back for his 9th year. I don't know how many years he's been in college. It's got to be at least 6. Auburn has good depth. Alabama, I think the upside for them is higher than Auburn, but they're both really good teams. I don't think Tennessee has that like you said, they don't have that guy that really can give them consistent offense night in and night out. Tennessee's always going to be tough on defense, especially with Zakai Ziegler back. But I think, honestly, I think the team that finishes in 3rd is not going to be Tennessee. I think Alabama will probably be 2, maybe 3. But I think it's probably going to be someone like Arkansas, maybe A&M, Ole Miss, someone like that. I think there's teams with a bit more upside. Someone could surprise you. Again, one of those Mississippi schools definitely have some interesting upside. Maybe Texas if they live up to it. Like I said, they got upside.
Yeah. I think Texas has the upside to finish 3rd in the conference, and probably a floor of like 11 or 12. Shout out to Sooners, picked 15th in the preseason poll. So clearly the transition.
You think Texas 15th.
No, Oklahoma's picked 15th.
Oh, Sooners. Sorry, I thought you said someone else had run a poll that was 16th or that had Texas 15th.
No, Oklahoma's picked 15th. But I have Alabama as my SEC champion, so I think we just picked the 2 that are kind of right at the top. But I think Mark Sears is the best player in the conference, maybe in the country, and just the way Nate Oates runs his offense, they're hard to play against. Night in and night out, and they go 12, 13 deep this year, so they're going to have no problem pushing the pace. They'll be top 5 in pace nationally at the end of the season. So I like Alabama. Mix in Grant Nelson as well. Shoot a lot of threes. That'll get you beat in a game here and there, but over a long season, for the most part, that's a solid way to ensure yourself a lot of wins. And for me, kind of the team that I already mentioned, Mississippi State is the team I'm looking at. They're picked 10th. I don't think they can win the conference. I think they could be a top 5 team in the conference and could be interesting in March.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, and then national championship. We do this every year. Who do you got?
I'm going with Houston as my pick. I think Kelvin Sampson's going to break through at some point, and you could pick Houston every year. Eventually, it's gotta happen. I think their backcourt with L.J. Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, Terrence Arsenault. They bring in Miles Uzan from Oklahoma. Like I think that probably is the best backcourt in the country. They go four deep. I think there will be times when all four of them are on the court at the same time. And then you have a Jawan Roberts down low, who even though he's only 6'7", he just dominates the glass on both ends of the floor. So they don't go as deep as a team like Alabama. That rotation might only be 7 or 8, but those are 7 or 8 quality basketball players. Kelvin Sampson's team always knows how to play together. They always play hard on both ends of the floor. And clearly, the transition to the Big 12 did not hamper them at all last year. So I think another strong season for Houston. I think they have the guards that'll end up getting it done in March and cutting it down.
Houston was a pick that I've had 3 picks that have been going around in my mind recently. Houston is one of them. I'm going to give you my boring one and then my fun one. My boring one is Duke. I think that John Shire's teams have been getting better each year he's been the head coach. I think he's been figuring it out more and more. That said, Duke obviously has a lot of talent. Just how reliable will that talent be this year? Obviously you got Cooper Flagg, but how much support is he going to get from a guy like a Caleb Foster or Tyrese Proctor? I personally like Duke, so I hope they do well. I'm from the Triangle area in North Carolina, so I used to root for them in basketball growing up. My fun pick, and it's not like this is like a super deep sleeper pick or anything, but they just stick out to me this year, is Iowa State. I think Iowa State has proven that they can go decently far when it comes to March. Otzelberger tends to be a pretty good postseason coach. They were close to making they made it to the Sweet 16 last year. They were close to beating Illinois, getting into the Elite Eight. I think that this year they're going to be even better than they were last year. I think they finished as a top 15 team. But even when they've been a little sluggish under Otzelberger, say 2022 postseason, they still made it to the Sweet 16. I think this is the best team he's had at Iowa State. Like, they got the guard play. Keyshawn Gilbert, UNLV transfer, Taman Lipsey coming back, one of the best guards in the Big 12. The front court's solid. I don't think it's elite, but it's solid. And so I think that Iowa State will be good enough in the Big 12 to get a good seed. Granted, the top of the Big 12 is very good between Baylor, Kansas, Iowa State, and Houston. Arizona, probably should be leaving them out. But Iowa State, to me, sticks out as a team that's done it before in the Big 12. They were solid last year. They were really tough out. They are always tough at home. And I think that Otzelberger has proven to be a pretty good postseason coach, and they got the postseason guard play to make it far. So that's my fun one. Duke, the boring one. We'll see how that plays out, though. It's so much of the NCAA tournament. It's almost for like an analytics nerd more fun to pick and more stable to pick the regular season #1 team.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so much of the tournament comes down to your path. Who are you playing?
Yeah,
if you
100%.
Yeah, you play 4 teams that are all quad 1 teams, and 2 of which are bad matchups for you, compared to a team that might be playing an injured. You're a 1 seed. You're playing an injured 8 seed in the second round, and then you have 2 other upsets around you.
Yeah, it's all about path, and you can and draw, and Illinois fans they'll never get over being a 1 seed with Iota Sumu and Kofi Cockburn, and they had to play Loyola Chicago in the second round. Like, Loyola Chicago was one of the most underseeded teams in recent memory when they got an 8 seed. So yeah, that's the beauty of the bracket. We're really kind of taking shots in the dark here.
Yeah, but there's a science to it, to a sense. UConn kind of bucked the trend in the sense that they were just so good that it didn't matter who they were playing the 2 years that they've won. So maybe you have a situation like that. Baylor, when they won, they were kind of like that. Their guard play was so damn good, and their rebounding and defense was so good that it didn't matter who was playing them. They were just on a mission in March and April. Was that 2021 they won? Yeah.
Yep.
And so, but Is this the year that you feel like there's the most teams that are in that like elite tier of the last, say, like 5 seasons?
I think so. Obviously, looking back, retrospect's 2020, but the UConn teams were, like you said, just so dominant. I think this
Yeah,
team there's this year there's going to be way more parity at the top.
right.
I don't think you're going to see a team get off to like a 15-0 start. I think these teams are going to kind of beat up on each other. And yeah, I think if there was any year where a team ranked in that 15 to 35 range could come out and be a real contender, that this would be the year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Ken Palm ratings right now. Houston is far and away the number one, not far and away, but is pretty sizably the number one team because of their defense.
That
Um,
makes sense.
but between Duke and Creighton, even at number 12, Creighton, another really solid squad. Given what Creighton does offensively, you've only got a net rating difference of ±3 between the number 2 and number 12 teams. And if you go back through old Ken Palm data, you have to go back, I think it's like 6 or 7 years to get anything that close, that parity between 2 to 12. And so you're right.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun. It's similar, I think, in a sense to the way college football's shaken out this season. That you've got what 8, maybe 10 teams. You don't have a clear cut number one, but it feels like there's what 8 or 10 teams in college football that could each realistically make it to that Final Four in the college football playoff.
Yeah,
And
talent's getting spread around. So I think we're seeing that in all sports, which is good. I think it's a good thing for college sports.
I think Texas, the thing is, can you pull it all together to really join that, top tier teams upside wise? I think Texas has the upside of like, say maybe I think Texas might have the upside of like a Gonzaga potentially.
Yeah,
That might be stretching it a little far. Maybe like an Arizona.
it's hard because it's like what do you mean by that exact? It's like what do you see as Arizona? What do I see as Arizona? I think Texas has an upside of a Final Four team. I think if you told me right now that Texas made the Final Four, I I think I wouldn't be shocked. I would be very pleasantly surprised, but I think the talent is there to make a Final Four. I think the lack of continuity and the potential questions we have about the head coach, you could end up being like a 10 seed. I think
Yeah,
I
I guess
think
my thing with Arizona, I still got questions about Tommy Lloyd, and like some of Arizona's scores aren't consistent, like efficient guys. I get that that's an easy target for Caleb Love, but like,
mhm.
I mean, realistically, it's not like Arizona has like a ton of like super proven guys coming back that are I don't know. I don't know a good way to describe it. You're right. It depends on how you view these teams, but in terms of teams that I might have a little bit of questions about the consistency of their top stars, which is why I think there's that gap in my head between like a Houston and an Iowa State and a Duke versus, or not, maybe not even Duke, but maybe like a Houston, Iowa State, or Alabama versus an Arizona or a Texas.
Mhm.
Where Alabama, you got Mark Sears, even Auburn, you got Janai Broom. We'll see if Cooper Flag emerges into that. Then Duke's in that category.
That's fair. I see what you're getting at, guys. Truly like the best players in the country.
Yeah,
Um,
like I mean, I get it's a different thing, but when you got that elite guy, it's or with Houston's case, a whole bevy of elite guards. Um, that yeah, it's and a consistent coach. Someone that's led the team far consistently on multiple chances. So, but yeah, no, I mean it's going to be a fun season, and for Texas getting this stretch of the next few weeks will be very telling. So, you have anything else that you wanted to add for this, or?
no, I think we about covered it all.
All right, well, yeah, I think that's all I got. Stay tuned to the site. We're gonna have plenty of coverage for hoops and throughout the season, but definitely in the upcoming weeks. With some of the big games coming up, UConn, NC State, Brooklyn games, Vegas opener, the whole nine. So Anyway, for Andrew Miller, Shane Black, Hook'emHeadlines.com, Hook 'em Horn Show. That's pretty much it. Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.